We welcome you to the 2008 edition of the Warren County Antique Quilt Show, and we're so glad you came. Let's go inside, won't you? Today we're starting with the Class A, which is the pieced section. These quilts over here, there's Class A number 4, Class K number 6, Class A number 13, and then all of these on this rack are still in pieced. We had 23 entries in our pieced quilts. As with any quilt show, you know it would be void without the wedding ring quilt. This is called the wedding ring pattern. And some of these quilts are very, very old, and I tell all of my visitors not to touch them, so I'll try my best to keep my hands from them. But they are very old. These quilts are judged by the ladies from Bell Buckle again. And we had 3 entries into the wedding ring. We had all kinds, no, I'm sorry, we have 4. I won't try to tell you how many entries we had in each class. But anyway, we're so proud of all the Warren Canyons who came out to bring their quilts. It seems the interest in this show grows from year to year. And every night before the Friday to register, I lay awake thinking, who's going to bring out a quilt this year? But they seem to make their appearance. And we're so thankful to all you who bring your quilts either to display or to enter. We wish we could give each of you a ribbon, and in our hearts we do. We have a ribbon in our hearts for all who participate. Okay, on this section of the piece, we do have some blue ribbon winners. We have this beautiful bear's paw quilt over here, who was entered by Lisa McCoy. I know you hear that name, Lisa and Bill McCoy, so many times throughout the show. We are not partial. Our rules do not say how many quilts can be entered. They enter quilts for your enjoyment, and they compete against themselves in their listing. So there's no money given, and this is their hobby. They go throughout the United States buying quilts. This year, they said with a shortage of gas and the price of gas, they only went to Kentucky, so they bought 10 new quilts last year. And some of them they entered, some of them they just brought for you to view. And we appreciate the McCoys, and no foul play is going on with the McCoys and the Gribbles, because you'll hear their name a lot. They do bring some prize winners, and we're grateful for that. This quilt up here took a first place ribbon, and it was bought in Kentucky by the McCoys. You do not have to make these quilts because you weren't there back then. So some people were told that they couldn't vote on a quilt because it wasn't made by them. Well, how in the world could we, all as young as we are, make all these antique quilts? Thank you for your questions, though. They are welcome. This is a beautiful quilt, Darrell, and it's so soft, and it's been so well preserved, and you should be, I wish you were able to see the tiny little stitching on it. It's a beautiful quilt, as are so many of these. We're still in the piece division. See, we have quilts of all patterns. We have basket quilts, we have tulip quilts, we have spool quilts. Can you see the 4 spools? It's called a spool pattern. But I do know that this one is a 7 sisters. Can you see the little stars all around and the star in the center? That is called the 7 sisters pattern. Now we have another star quilt up here that looks very much like that pattern, but it's different in the fact that the stars are joined. So each pattern maker designed their own quilts, and then there wasn't a quilt shop around that they could run to and buy a new quilt book every year, so they designed their own patterns. Aren't they wonderful? This is another little type of a star quilt. These are different design quilts. This one, for instance, who won the 2nd place, said this was pieced by Jerry Hastings' grandmother, Mrs. Lou White of White County. It was quilted by Jerry's grandmother, Ella Hastings of White County. Aunt Beulah Hutchins of White County worked in it. It is over 50 years old, and that's displayed by Jerry and Betty Hastings. And it's a yellow and white, and isn't that cheerful? This would have made a good Christmas quilt. That belongs to Helen Martin. She didn't tell us how old it was, but Helen has an eye for the aged. If you display a quilt in this quilt show and it doesn't win a ribbon, you're entitled to bring it back next year and re-enter. Sometimes, you know, the judges, they just have so many, and they do their very best to pick the oldest quilts. So if your quilt doesn't win a ribbon, you may feel free to enter it again next year in 2009. This is a quilt called Robbing Peter to Pay Paul. This quilt pattern is the maple leaf, sorry about that, and that's in the Gribble collection. They also have some beautiful quilts, but they all can't be ribbon winners, and it grieves me. These 2 quilts, we're still in the piece category. That's the back of the one that has the blue ribbon on the other side. These are called Around the World, and they're very old. This is very old material. And since I can't see the other side, I don't know if there's a ribbon over there or not, but we just want all of our quilts to be seen by all of you. These quilts, most of them are listed as crib quilts. This one, however, does not classify as a crib quilt. We had a class 1. This is number 3, number 4. This one was entry number 1. That was entry number 2. I'm sorry. And this is still entered in the crib quilts. And isn't that a gorgeous little quilt? This is an unquilted top. We also have a class for that, which is Class E. And again, that belongs to Lisa McCoy. She just tries to get one in every class. And she has a wonderful Amish woman who quilts these quilts for her, and they turn out beautifully. We may see this years from now as a quilted piece. You notice this ribbon, a red ribbon, says prize number 2, 2nd place in crib quilts. That's from the collection of Sheba Gribble, and that's a beautifully quilted little quilt. And the blue ribbon winner is I guess she considered this a baby quilt. She entered it in Class H, however, which is pieced and quilted as made. This is called a cathedral window. Each little block is folded in a way that's 4 little blocks. The way she folds them and puts them together makes what's called the window. And Lisa's got that in Kentucky. She said Kentucky was her state this year, so we're having to give Kentucky some recognition too. But that's a beautiful little quilt. This is a class called Most Unusual. As I told you, back in the days of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers and all that, they just sometimes made their own pattern, and I was unable to come up with a name for this pattern. That's on Bathsheba Gribble. And it's beautiful. The colors are so good still. This is a Martha Martin entry, Class 1, Class F, number 1. She got the number 2 prize. This quilt is unusual in the fact that it has French knots and not tacked. You can see on the back where the little knots have come through, and they have so cleverly hidden the ends of those things. So that got a red ribbon. And you wonder, Olive, why didn't this get a ribbon? Why didn't that? I don't know why it didn't. We didn't have enough ribbons, I guess, but the little points are cut off, and the judges say that counts so much. But this was a most unusual quilt. This belongs to Mary Sue Clendenin. And the sunflowers, if you could see, these little things are gathered together to make it look like the petals. And the judges thought that was really most unusual, and they liked it. But they decided that the fabric in the most unusual, which got number 1 in that class, was older. And instead of this being little pieces in this little hexagon, she actually quilted the hexagons inside each of these little green squares. And the color combination and the age of the material and the condition of the quilt is some of the things they go by. We go over to another class, which is called the string quilts. See, all this, they're not actually strings, but they're scraps of fabric that they use to put together. This one's put together in a design that's really pretty. This one is more intricate. It has the little bias pieces, but the judges seem to think this one required more labor to make. This quilt is made by Nellie Cantrell, and they're not sure of the age. But that's the number 1 winner in the string quilt. This one is the 3rd place winner. There's a lot of strings went into that too, and a lot of thought. Okay, now we go to friendship, and everyone loves a friendship quilt. If you don't have a friendship quilt, you need to have one. They're so much fun. This quilt, the husband came in, who is Mr. Rodney Boyd. And Rodney, I hope I have your permission. He came in and saw this quilt. He called his wife and says, "Honey, take our quilt off the wall and bring it to the fair." And she says, "What?" And he said, "Please take the quilt off the wall and bring it to the courthouse at the Warren County Fair." And he told me the story of this quilt. He said his grandfather was a minister of the Happy Valley Church in Dalton, Georgia for many, many years. And he served quite well, evidently, because when he left, they wanted to honor him. And the Sunday school members did all the embroidery on them. And there's many, 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 many names on this quilt. And I hope he'll be happy to know that he had a number 1 quilt hanging on his wall. And we thank his lovely wife for bringing this. So congratulations to the Boyds. This other friendship quilt that won number 2 was quilted by Grace Hilly Simons. And she was the aunt of the lady who entered this, who is known as Clarita Wilshire. Most everyone knows Clarita. She's a fine lady. But it was quilted by Grace Hilly Simons, which was an aunt of Clarita. These are family and friends from the Rocky River community. And Clarita says, the only one I know living on this here is still Beatrice Hillis. This quilt was made in 1924. So that's certainly a keepsake. And it's so neat. Now, when we're doing friendship quilts in our quilting guild, we don't know who Inez is. She could have been my Aunt Inez because I had one, but it doesn't tell her last name. It doesn't tell the date. And it takes more time to embroider all that, but that would be so helpful to our ancestors, our great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren, if they would put that on there or put a label somewhere on the quilt that gives the dates, and perhaps this might have one. I didn't do all the folding on these quilts. I had to be checking the quilts in, but this is a very old quilt. As you can see, some of it is in strings, and that's Miss Audrey Hillis who did that. And Clarita is very proud of that, and we appreciate Clarita for bringing her quilt out to show. Okay, we're in another class called Class C, and these are entered as embroidered quilts. See the little colonial ladies? This is a quilt of the year. It has all the months of the year on it, what year that, but it doesn't have the date when it was made. But it's still a lovely quilt. And I just have to tell you a cute little story about this one. May I tell you a personal story? When the lady brought this one in, Patsy Webb was helping me check in, she's a very good helper. The lady brought it in, and it was facing this way toward Patsy, and she said, "Oh, we have a little turkey quilt. Look at the butterfly. It does look like a turkey. There's its beak and its feet." And the lady said, "That happens to be a butterfly." So as you turn it around, there's the butterfly. In that cute story, I thought, I love that. And this quilt is in very good condition. The colors have held up well on it. You can tell it's been laundered, I believe, because it's so soft. And that took the second place in this category. And we thank Melissa Paz for this. The third place was the little month of the year. And the first place was again Lisa McCauley. This is another Kentucky quilt, but there's butterflies. I mean, morning glories. I've got butterflies on the brain, but morning glories, you can't see it, I'm sure, but the morning glories are incorporated in the sash in between the quilts in the quilting patterns. And that is a lovely, lovely quilt, and it's well kept through the years. And that's more little French knots and embroidery, and that's a very neat quilt. Now we move into a new class, which is called applique. This is Class B, applique. Here's another little colonial lady. Her dresses and parasols and the flowers are all appliqued on, and the bright reds have held up so well through the years, and that's well-preserved quilt, as is the little Dutch style. Every woman wants to make a little Dutch style, and I'm even in the process of making one for my granddaughter from her little dresses. It may be finished before I go if I get an extension on my living days, but they're fun. They're really fun. And this one, the little note on it says the applique was done by Cleo Sullivan. That was Carrie Hedwig's grandmother. The blocks were set together probably by Emily Jones. The quilting was done by Maureen Green, and Carrie's very proud of that. It has her own little dress things on there, and that didn't win a blue ribbon, but it didn't win any ribbon, so she's eligible to enter that one next year, and the judges urged her to do so. And in the embroidery class, the third place went again to Lisa McCoy. That's another butterfly quilt. But it's got pretty colors, it's bound well, it's been kept nice, and that got the third place. The second place is a very old Dutch style, but isn't it, darling? All the colors are so vivid on this. The little pastels are a little pastel, but that belongs to Miss Shevel Gribble, and she knows how to pick these quilts, and they're preserved well. Thank you, Shevel. And this one is another little applique. That's called a Dresden plate. And it's a well-done quilt also. But as I say, they can't all be winners. And now, what else can I say? This quilt is breathtaking. It's owned by Murtis de Mombrium, and Murtis doesn't know who made it. She doesn't know who made the quilt, but she said it had been in her family, and I thought her sister-in-law gave it to her, but she informed me I was wrong. She didn't know where she got it. She said, I remember it, I was a little girl and I didn't like quilts. But it is a lovely quilt, and the quilting, you will not believe on this. The little stitches, there must be 14 to the inch. And every little basket holds a different applique flower. And that is just a wonderful quilt. People really enjoyed that, and as you can see, it's won Best of Show. It hasn't won the purple ribbon, but we don't close the voting until 4:30 on Sunday afternoon, so it still has some time to go. It also won the first place in the applique. And thank you, Murtis, for bringing that quilt. Okay, we're around to 2 more classes. We had 1 entry in each class, so that was easy judging. They automatically gained the first place ribbon. This is what's called a utility quilt. I remember my mother making these, and they were made to keep us warm, and sometimes they were so heavy you couldn't turn over in bed. If you did, you lost your warm spot, but you went back to it. And they're made by just all kinds of things, and usually they're really heavy. These weren't made by poor people like me. They've got velvet in them. But that won in its class, and that belongs to Melissa. Okay, this is a beautiful quilt, and I can't remember the story on it, and I hesitate to repeat things because they say I'm mixing up. I don't know why, do you? But this is called a whole cloth quilt. Now, if you don't know what a whole cloth quilt is, this design was not pieced. This was made by the members of Liberty Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and Mildred Phillips turned out to be the proud owner of this. This is called our Class L. It was the only one in its class, so she definitely got a blue ribbon. But it is well quilted. I don't know how many of the ladies out there participated in the quilting, but it's a beautifully done quilt. And she says she doesn't use it. She looks at it, and I don't blame her. I would too. It's pretty. Very pretty. Thank you, Mildred. We come over here to the coverlet section. We have a class for the coverlet section, which is Class J. And this just blows my mind how Shebel Gribble gets out and finds all these yard sale items. She found this item in a yard sale, and this quilt made by this lady came to America when she was 20 years old. And Shebel found it in a yard sale. And it is absolutely beautiful. It's a big size quilt, has a gorgeous border on it, and I just can't imagine it. She also found this one at the same location. That one took the 2nd place. This one took the 1st place. So Sheba says she uses this as a coverlet, but it could be used as a tablecloth. She said she put a pink sheet under it, and it was absolutely beautiful. And while she was there, she saw this little knitted coverlet. The finest little thread you've ever seen knitted into this beautiful shell pattern or clown pattern, whatever they call it. She asked her advisor if she should go back and buy that quilt, and she said, go as fast as you can. So Sheba went back and bought that, and she has a wonderful collection. Now we go over here again to Bill and Lisa. This is a summer coverlet. Beautiful embroidered lilacs, which I had never seen lilacs in embroidery in my time, but it's lovely. It's just lovely. It has them all the way down through the corners and all. And our judges liked lilacs also, so that turned out to be #1 in the coverlet class, but you have 1, 2, and 3. And that one can come back next year. And now we come to what I consider the best part of the film. I met this lady in the beauty shop, a month or so ago. And when I went in the beauty shop Friday to remind Mildred Phillips, who is my operator, I told her not to forget to bring her quilts. That afternoon I was checking in the quilts. And I'm sorry if I sound weepy, but I am. This lady called me over to her chair, and she said, I have something for you. I said, oh, are you going to enter a quilt? She says, no, I have something for you, and I'm going to bring it to you. And thanks to Ben Lomond Communications, she had seen me on the film strip. And she didn't want me to enter it. Well, really, she brought it early Saturday morning. And she had this beautiful thing laying across her arms in the tissue paper, and she motioned for me to come to her. So I went over there, and she said, I want you to have this quilt. She said, I bought it at Dad Lively's sale many years ago, and because it's threadborne, I guess, her family didn't want it. And I became the recipient of this beautiful, beautiful crazy quilt. And I have always wanted a crazy quilt. And this has made all my hard work joy. It's pure joy. She said, this is your quilt to take home. And she did not desire to display it, but I asked her if I might display it for you. And the Fair Board members have told me to place a blue ribbon on it. So I'm going to give the ribbon to Diane. And I appreciate that so much. And I just think that's an unbelievable story. But I'm so glad she knew me. Isn't it lovely?
It is.
Okay, as we leave the 2008 quilt show for today, on our way out, we have placed the Hearth and Home Quilters. That's the antique quilters of today. We hope someday some of our great-grandchildren will bring our works to the fair and say, my grandmother made this. That's our goal.